Okay, the first thing that you need to know about speciation is that it's a formation of new species. Yeah, it's a formation of new species. Whichever way you will go about explaining it, it's going to state that it's the formation of new species. And for you to understand as to what we mean by new species being formed, it's important that you know what the meaning of a species is. Just go back and revise that, and be sure you know how we differentiate between a species and a population. Now, let me give a general account of how the process takes place. This is how the process occurs. I'm not going to use this presentation as rigid as it looks, but this is what you need. Let us look at this. I'm not sure, are these lizards or what? It's just that I didn't go through the whole. Let us assume these are lizards or these organisms. Let me rather say these organisms. If you look at these organisms, it looks as though they used to be, or they used to belong to the same population, which means they were like in the same place. They were in the same habitat. They were belonging to the same species. They were actually the same group that had the same characteristics and living in the same place. Now, as time went on, this is what happened. They became split or separated into two. Remember how many populations did we originally have? It was one population. But as time went on, due to a number of factors, one of which could be migration in search of food in different seasons. Then when members of a population migrate, it happens that they come across a physical or a geographic barrier. So now please take note of what I'm saying, and it's very much important, such that whenever you present your answer in this regard, you should always mention that the population members or the members of the population got separated from each other by a geographic barrier. And from the context of the question paper, if this was given in your question paper, definitely you would be expected to state that they became separated by a geographic barrier, which was the sea. No, sorry. In this regard, it's not the sea, it's the river. So what is important in the context of speciation, before you say more things, you just have to make sure that you tell us what is it that is separating the members of a population, thereby splitting them into two populations. Okay. Now, once they are exposed, once they are now separated into two different environmental conditions, once they are separated into two different places now, such as in this case, environmental conditions this side are totally different from environmental conditions this side, which means what is going to happen is the conditions this side being different from the conditions this side. As this population now keeps on reproducing, the species or the offspring that it produces will be exposed to these environmental conditions, and gradually they change, because once you talk of changes in the environment, remember, evolution is definitely going to take place. Species are going to the offspring are going to change in trying to adapt to the changes in the environment. When this process takes place this side, and it also takes place this side, it continues, and obviously as they adapt this side and as they adapt to this side, what's going to eventually happen is they become different from each other. And as they become different from each other, the manner in which they are going to be different from each other will be phenotypically and genotypically. And as time goes on, even if one member can be taken from this side and we try to interpret it from a member from this other side, they won't be able to interpret. And remember the rules that we apply when we talk of a species. When organisms cannot interbreed, thereby producing viable and fertile offspring, it means they do not belong to the same species. So I was just talking about these points in general terms. So now let us go now to this one. I think it's going to help us. Now, if a question says, look at these species, look at this picture, the first picture here. It was my highlighter. Look at the first picture. Even though they are separated, because it was at the earliest stages of the separation, they still look alike. But because of the fact that we talked about, the fact that they are exposed to different environmental conditions, look at how these ones look like now and how these ones look like. Remember, the process all began from the picture above. So now, this is now evidence that they are undergoing natural selection. And as these ones undergo natural selection, this side, they are undergoing natural selection in adapting to these particular environmental conditions, regardless of what is happening this side. In other words, independently of what is happening this side. So now, that's how the process takes place over years. So now what is important when a question says, explain as to how the original population eventually became these two different species, then these are the points that you are going to mention, and they are used in even in the exam guidelines exactly as they are. You need to master those points. You are going to say, according to your exam guidelines, a population becomes separated, or you use any other words, that means separation. You may say they get divided, they get separated, they get split. You say that the members of a population get split or separated. Most importantly, we want you to say by a geographic barrier, and in the context of what will be given in the question paper, you must specifically tell us what is it that in this context that served as a geographic barrier. So in this regard, you are going to say it's the river. Now, obviously, into how many populations was it divided? Then in this regard, it was divided into two more populations. That is also important, because the exam guideline will simply say a population is separated into two groups. But you don't just get complacent and get carried away and say, this is a point that I know, I took it as it is from the exam guideline. What is important is you are going to look at what is given in the question paper. Sometimes they may have an island, an island, and an island. So now we have 1, 2, 3. You check in the context of the question paper to say, does it still align with what the exam guideline says? So you don't, in other words, memorize what the exam guideline stipulates, or what your textbook says. You just make sure that you respond according to what is given in the question paper. If it splits a population into two more populations or group, you say that the population was split into 3 populations. So I was just giving you an example of how we respond to questions. So yeah, you are going to say population is separated, and when this population is separated, in this regard, it's separated into two populations. And most importantly, as they are separated, I would want you to I would want you to replace this point, or rather not replacing it, even if you can remove this part, because it means the same thing as this one, and this is exactly what they will want at the marking center. A population is separated by a geographic barrier into 2 populations, and the geographic barrier was the river. In other words, you're going to say a population was separated by the river, which acted as a geographic barrier, or you can just say by a geographic barrier, which was the sea, which was the river rather in this case. Then you state it split into two, as it was split into two in this regard. Then you move on. The next point, there is no gene flow between the two populations. If in the question paper again it is three populations, you are going to say there's no gene flow between the three populations. What does that mean? It means they do not have a chance. A member from this side will never have a chance to come and mate with this one. In other words, there's no transfer of genes from this population to this population. Yes, then we move on. Then obviously they are now exposed to different environmental conditions or selective forces, selective pressures. It is exposed. They are exposed to different environmental conditions, and as a result, on environmental conditions this side are different from these. Then it means these members are going to adapt. They are going to undergo natural selection. These ones will also undergo natural selection. So we say this is natural selection is going to take place, or rather say they undergo natural selection. Okay, let me rather say each population, yes, by each we're talking about this one and this one. Each population undergoes natural selection independently. That's the most important thing. Each population undergoes natural selection. If you leave out independently, they are not going to award a mark for that. Then, because saying that they undergo natural selection independently means what is going to happen this side is absolutely different from what is going to happen this side. Then as a result, subsequently of what happened due to natural selection, then the members become different from each other. They become different. You also state how do they become different. They become different genotypically and phenotypically. And as a result, because of the fact that they have now become different from each other, then even if you bring them together once more, they are not going to be able to interpret. And the fact that they are no longer able to interpret, it means it's scientific indication that they have now become new species or different species. So that is how we explain the whole process of speciation, the one that involves geographic barrier, which is called allopatric speciation. Yeah, what is important is you just need to understand the explanation that I gave in this regard, and then make sure you practice to talk about all these points. You must know all these points, but most importantly, look at them the way they explain them in them. They are correct here as well, but I want you to look at them the way they explain them in the exam guideline. Once you master